The use of deadly force by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri sparked a public outcry, raised media attention, and has also raised a lot of questions about the use of community policing in communities across the nation and even the so-called militarization of police. Here to join us to talk about this issue as it relates to Murfreesboro is Police Chief Glenn Chrisman.
Good morning, Mike. My pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk first of all about your reaction to what's happened in Ferguson and how it relates to the assessment that law enforcement leaders across the country are making at this time.
Well, I think it's very difficult for all of us to watch. The policing action that was the beginning of that situation, we don't understand the facts surrounding that yet. We don't know for sure what happened, but certainly the reaction to it, the public reaction to it, the police response to that, I think was something that was of concern to all Americans and certainly to the law enforcement community. And what it causes us to do, I think, is to look at that situation and learn from it. We all improve by learning from the experiences of other people, and I think law enforcement leaders, law enforcement officers all across the United States are looking at what happened in Ferguson, and they're trying to, I guess, examine it from the standpoint of how they would have responded or what they might have done differently or what we could do differently should a situation evolve like that in our own communities.
Are there any significant misconceptions or misunderstandings that have come out of this due to the intense media attention that law enforcement is dealing with now?
Well, I think the biggest thing there is that we have to understand what the roles and responsibilities of both parties are. Law enforcement, police agencies have the responsibility not only to enforce the law, but they also have the responsibility to provide service to their respective communities. And it's a delicate balance. Enforcing the law means that you're not always going to make people happy with every outcome, whether it's the issuance of a traffic citation or the effecting a custodial arrest. And you have to balance the need for the enforcement of law that the citizens have had enacted through their elected representatives with that need that everybody has for public service. The common denominator of anybody that calls the police department or any law enforcement agency is they need some kind of assistance. And I think it's important for the police to be seen as that public servant, that person that's going to provide service when it's needed by citizens, but also be able to respond to those law enforcement needs and to be able to proactively enforce the laws that the people have said they need for the safety and security of their communities. It's a delicate balancing act, and it requires the police and citizens to work together in order to be successful at accomplishing both goals.
One issue that has emerged, Chief, or re-emerged, is the racial composition of police forces. Has that come to your attention?
Oh, it has, and I think not just now, but I think in any community, law enforcement agencies have to strive to be representative of the communities that they serve. We are always seeking to reach out to the various sectors of the community and identify qualified candidates who are interested in law enforcement careers that can work in Murfreesboro and other law enforcement agencies all across the nation, so that their agencies can be representative of the diversity that's in the community. That's important not only for police-community relations, but it's important for how the police themselves look at their mission and their jobs. You know, it was often said that if you have institutional diversity within your organization, then the cultural diversity piece comes pretty easy because you're working alongside males, females, African Americans, people with other ethnicities. They become your colleagues, and so dealing with those citizen groups that need police service and need law enforcement services becomes the norm rather than the exception.
Has Murfreesboro found it more challenging to match that representation in, let's say, the Latino community than the African American community?
That's certainly always a challenge, because one of the things that you have to do is be able to encourage interest and encourage someone who may be looking at a public service or law enforcement career to reach out to law enforcement as a way to fulfill that career path. And I'd say there's still some work to do with the Latino community all across the nation, not just here.
Another big issue, of course, that's emerged is the so-called militarization of the police force and the purchase of military vehicles. In fact, I think even today, Congress is looking at this issue in Washington.
They are, and I think one of the important points to bring out there is these vehicles and this surplus equipment, it's already been purchased by the taxpayer. And if we're able to repurpose that equipment to a local law enforcement agency that has a need for it, then not only do we save the reinvestment of local tax dollars in purchasing new equipment, but we take that repurposed equipment that the military has surplused and allow local law enforcement agencies to use it to protect and serve their local communities. Two good examples of that here. Unfortunately, we live in a time where active shooter has become a part of our vocabulary. That's not always been the case. Post 9/11, we deal with a situation where we have homeland security and domestic terrorism that also fall within the responsibility and the duties of local law enforcement. So if we expect that our local law enforcement officers are going to respond to and safely and effectively deal with situations that often involve homeland security, domestic terrorism, or active shooter situations, we have to provide them with the tools to do that safely. Just last week we had a situation where a call came to the police of a purported homicide that had occurred in an apartment where there was a hostage being held. And one of the great strengths for the police is if we can respond to a situation like that where we believe there has been violent, perhaps a heavily armed gunman with an armored vehicle that can provide protection for the police that are responding, but also provide for the safe resolution of that conflict, if there is one, by putting the police and the citizens on either side of an armored vehicle so that they're not in the open for hostile, heavily armed gunmen, then the chances of a safe resolution of that problem greatly increase.
So all across the country, Chief, there are incidents where this type of either vehicles or equipment is necessary in order to quell a situation. Can you think of some recent examples?
Well, there are a lot. The one that I remember most recently was a situation in the western part of the country where a gentleman had supposedly shot a family member, had got in a vehicle and fled from the scene, had made statements that he would shoot police officers that approached him or that came into contact with him. Two law enforcement agencies were able to respond to that scene with armored vehicles and essentially blocked in his vehicle in a safe place and were able to contain his movements from a position of cover and protection for the police officers. And as a result, he was removed from the vehicle safely. There were no shots fired, no one was injured, and had they not had those armored vehicles to use in that way, that situation could have turned out much differently.
What type of vehicles does Murfreesboro have that have been purchased from the military?
We had an MRAP, a mine-resistant armor-protected vehicle, that we took possession of for virtually nothing. We did spend a little money to have it repainted. But this vehicle has 3/4-inch armor plate steel on the outside that would protect you from as much as 50 caliber incoming rounds to use in tactical deployment situations. And primarily where that vehicle is of great benefit is where we have someone who may be armed with an assault rifle, may be armed with a high-powered rifle, may have threatened or taken the life of another person, and now the police have to respond to that situation and try and safely and effectively take that person into custody or prevent him or her from injuring someone else. I recall a situation from early in my career where we had a gunman who had shot an individual who was still alive but was lying in the yard in front of the house. And so the task or the challenge then becomes, how do we get to this victim that's already been shot by the assailant who is barricaded in this house? How do we get to that victim safely and remove them from medical treatment to save their life without putting someone else in that line of fire? And an armored vehicle like this is exactly the piece of equipment that you need to safely respond to situations like that. I hope we never have to use it.
The purchase of a vehicle like that is no secret, right? I mean, how do you become transparent when it comes to buying these military
in our case, there was some discussion in the council about it after it was acquired, and I think, while this is a vehicle that's not going to be driven around the streets every day, it's going to be deployed in very selective use situations when you need that kind of protection. It's a part of the equipment it's used by the police, much as is other equipment that we use for special operations and special deployments when we have serious tactical needs like that.
Without making you comment too much on the situation in Ferguson, one of the, I guess, the public responses to that was the visual response by Ferguson. I guess it was a riot squad, and I assume we have a riot squad here. Would it look much different than what they did?
Well, we have what's called a field force operations unit, and that's a team of uniformed police officers that wear the same uniform that I'm wearing, or one that looks very similar to this. They would be equipped with helmets, with shields to protect them from debris, and they'd have batons to protect themselves should they need that in a situation like that. But you have to remember that when you have a crowd control situation, you want the police to be visible, you want them to be protected from objects, bottles, rocks, whatever that might be thrown at them. But at the same time, they have to be recognized as a police, as public servants that are there to try to quell any kind of a crowd control situation you have. But the appearance would be very similar to what our normal police officers wear. They wouldn't be wearing camouflage clothing. We do have camouflage uniforms for people that are deployed in special operations situations that may need to approach an objective from wooded cover or grassy areas and those kinds of situations. But that's the exception to the rule, not the norm.
And both of those units would receive specialized training, would they not?
Absolutely.
And it's according to whatever the incident is in terms of the response. So there's not an over response to something that might be less.
That's true, and I think they do receive special training, both of those units and other units within the police department, depending on what the need is and what the situation is. And I think what the police always want to do is deploy the least amount of force necessary to bring any situation under control. A good deal of the training that we're involved with every year deals with the police response to things like school safety issues, active shooter issues. We have a group of people now who have received critical incident training, crisis intervention training, to help them recognize and deal with people that they may come into contact with on police calls for service that may be suffering from a mental illness or some kind of emotional crisis, to be able to recognize those symptoms and de-escalate those situations. So there's a lot of training that we are involved with every year that deal with how to handle situations with the minimal amount of force necessary and be able to safely and effectively provide for whatever the needs of the community are or whatever that person that's called needing police assistance seeks.
Well, Chief, tell us more about that. We'd like to learn more about the crisis intervention team, and so the public knows what that's really all about.
Well, several years ago, we began to become aware that we were dealing with an increasing number of individuals who were dealing with emotional issues, who may be suffering from mental illness or issues like that. And there were some programs that were developed across the nation, and Memphis, Tennessee was the first location where we saw some development of that program. We had officers that went through crisis intervention training and gained designation as CIT certified officers, and they are particularly able to recognize individuals that are struggling with mental illness issues, that may be having an emotional crisis, that need police response and intervention into those circumstances, but that may not be criminal violators and may not need to be incarcerated. And what these officers have been trained to do is to recognize and respond to those situations, de-escalate those situations wherever they can, and provide care and treatment for those individuals rather than seeking a punitive law enforcement arrest type situation or conclusion to those outcomes.
The other terminology that has come out of this argument or debate has been community policing. Is that the answer to mitigating problems like that, or I mean, is it just one tool? How do you view that?
I think it's one part of the answer, and I think it's one tool that cities have used extensively since probably the late 80s, early 90s. We know that cities, neighborhoods are all communities in and of themselves, and I think to the extent that the police and the community work together to recognize what problems are, what the needs of the community are, then we're both in a better position to provide the services that are needed to address safety and security needs, whether it's a problem with burglaries in a neighborhood, thefts from vehicles, drug activity, speeding, whatever that issue may be. As I said earlier, the common denominator for people who call the police for service is they need assistance in some fashion or another. So community policing, I think, is at the heart of all of that, because what it does is allows the police and citizens to work together, recognize those needs, and then define what the best response or the best solution is to that set of problems. In Murfreesboro, we have community policing officers assigned to housing area offices that work closely with housing residents. They work closely with people that live in inner city, densely populated urban neighborhoods that might have specific kinds of police needs and law enforcement needs. But they also are deployed at Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation facilities, because we know we have a lot of situations where you have populations of folks that are using those facilities, and oftentimes there are law enforcement and public safety needs there. And I want to even expand that community policing role to the schools, because with 900 or 1,000 children in a school setting now, those are little cities of their own. And in addition to working with school administrators and principals and teachers to try to make those school environments as safe as they can be, we also spend a good deal of time, and I'd suggest to you that this is a community policing response as well, educating our young children on the issues connected to drugs, gangs, violence, and how to be effectively prepared to deal with the challenges that they may confront dealing with all three of those issues. We want them to have an early start on those things so that they can avoid problems as they grow and mature and develop and advance in their lives.
And I guess community policing is really a two-way street, because it's not just what you're trying to communicate or enforce in the public. You actually gain from the tips that you get by relating to the people out there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're at our absolute best from a policing standpoint when we have an effective relationship with the citizens that we serve. Only one of those tools that I'll mention here is our Citizens Police Academy. Over the last, I think we've 28 classes now, 28 sessions. We're approaching about 500 people that have been involved in Citizens Police Academy. And one of the things that we say there is we want to share with people who attend the academy and give them information on how we provide policing services in the city of Murfreesboro, but we also want to learn from them as to how we could do some of those things better. We want their feedback. We seek their feedback. I think that's how you improve. That's how you strengthen not only the delivery of police services, but you strengthen relationships in the community that help you grow and develop and do a better job of serving the people that we're sworn to protect.
So community policing seems like a no-brainer, that it's the right approach. What are the challenges that prevent it from happening in a lot of communities?
Well, I think you have to have outreach from both perspectives. I think citizens have to be willing and able to invest time to work with police and to, I guess, understand a little bit more about the law enforcement issues and challenges that are part of the work that we do every day. But then I think the police also have to understand the unique challenges that citizens are confronting in their neighborhoods every day, in their workplaces every day, and we have to look for solutions to those issues if they're related to law enforcement and public safety that serve both parties. And I think it's a busy world. You know, people are working, they've got children in school. You know, so often I think For the police, it's responding to a call for service and trying to find a solution to that and go to the next call. For the citizen complainant, they've got an issue that needs police attention. They want a solution that resolves that issue where they don't have to deal with it again. And oftentimes the best way to arrive at that mutually sought conclusion is to work together and share information and share resources. That's when it works the best.
Finally, what do you think the positives are, especially when we relate it here to Murfreesboro, that are going to come out of the situation in Ferguson?
Well, I'll go back to what we said when we began the discussion. I think we all learn from the experiences of other people. I recall very vividly watching the Rodney King situation unfold, and I recall very vividly how that affected police-community relations and police training and the development of police training after that. Similarly, I remember watching those airliners crash into the buildings on 9/11 and how those events and this whole domestic terrorism, homeland security change kind of gripped our nation, and how policing kind of changed in response to that. I think Ferguson will be no different. I think it will make us painfully aware of the importance of effective communication between our communities and our police, our elected and appointed officials. I think it highlights the importance of community policing, being responsive to issues in the community and making sure that we're doing the best we can to respond to and be good public servants, if not great public servants, when we have issues like that. And I think the message for law enforcement and communities is to learn from that and be stronger and better to avoid those situations in the future.
Well, Chief, thanks for what you and your officers do to keep our community safe. It's a safe community, and we want to keep it that way, right?
It's a great community. We have great citizens, and we have the finest police officers anywhere. We're very blessed and proud. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Chief Glenn Chrisman with the Murfreesboro Police Department.